I'm the executive director of the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network. I'm supposed to be welcoming you along with Brian Hudson, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Unfortunately, Brian is held up in some matters in D.C. He does expect to be joining us at lunchtime, and we do still look forward to his making some remarks at that time. You are a group, we had about 125 people registered for today, which we were really pleased with, especially because this conference didn't have a lot of advance notice. And you are a group of almost entirely either legal services, lawyers and paralegals, or housing counselors. I think we do have, this is open, it's a CLE event, it's open for other attorneys. I think we do have one in attendance, but the group is mostly made up of that. And I do want to mention, within the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network, we handle about over 100,000 cases a year in a variety of matters. And all told, about 10,000 of those have to do with mortgage foreclosures, whether it's the foreclosure itself or consumer issues relating to the foreclosure, or it's a bankruptcy to avoid a foreclosure. So it continues to be a major area that we are very much involved in. And for the project that Legal Services has partnered with PHFA and the housing counselors on, we are at just nearly at the level of about 3,500 cases that have been handled or are underway in that project. And I do want to confirm for folks that an application is underway to extend that project one final time to June 30 of 2011. So, and we fully expect that that is going to be granted, permitted, and so we are not up against a December 31 deadline of finishing cases or making the referrals. And I really do want to encourage the housing counselors in the room to be continuing to make referrals. This is an important project, and we want to be able to help homeowners avoid foreclosures. I want to mention that my role today, aside from welcoming you, is for those who have attended our Excellence Banquet, you know my role there oftentimes is the timekeeper. And so I will try to keep us on schedule. I do have a cane in the back of the room in case it's needed, and I'll stop people if they're extending on, because then we're going to be moving into the next panel's time frame. We will generally be asking people to introduce themselves, but I'm pleased that we have a panel, or we have a series of panels made up of a combination of representatives of PHFA, representatives of the Legal Services Program, private counsel in the foreclosure area, and government officials, as well as representatives of PHFA itself. So it'll be, I think, kind of a broad-based, sometimes opposing view, even presentation for you. I want to remind folks of two things that hopefully you got if you needed them at the front registration desk. One of them is the travel reimbursement form, and I encourage everybody who's going to be seeking travel reimbursement to make sure before the end of the day that you've gotten one of these, even if you're a legal services person who's going to be asking for reimbursement directly through your program, and then we will be reimbursing your program. You still ought to look at the instructions. And for others, if you're seeking reimbursement, which is fine, we encourage you to do, but please make sure you get that form. The other thing is this green form is for lawyers looking to get CLE credits for today. Make sure that you've gotten one of these green forms. There is a box at the registration desk that you can leave that at the end of the day, or if for some reason you're having to leave early, you would be leaving it then at the time that you leave. I want to mention we do have a mic that's in the middle of the room here, and that is intended so that members of the audience during panel, let each panel say how they're going to handle any comments or questions, but that's the place that you could go if you wanted to make a comment or ask a question of any of the presenters or panelists. Maybe that's a good time to note that, as you can see in the back of the room, the entire event is being videotaped. So just remember, your comments will be videotaped. It's our intent to, while we have a good turnout today, to be able to replay this in different venues. It will be available for viewing in different parts of the state. And I do want to say a few thank yous from the legal services, and I want to thank, and they're probably all out front doing things, but Hank Leone and Christine Kirby and Fran Weisinger, who've played such a major role in putting together today's event. And also from PHFA, I see Terry Redmond, who's been so vital to the success of this project. Bob Bobenchuk, I think I also saw in the room. I know we were expecting Ed Martinez, and I don't know if I've seen him yet, but thanks also to Ed. Thanks, of course, to Brian Hudson, who will be here later today, and to the presenters on our panels, as well as to Rebecca Peace, General Counsel at PHFA. So I may not have taken up quite the full amount of time, but I remind you that we're gonna hear from Brian also. And unless there are any questions about that part of things, I'm gonna hand things over to Mark Schwartz, who is the moderator for the first panel, and ask that the first panelists come up front, and we'll get started. Thanks all of you for coming today.
Good morning, everyone. One of our panelists, George Gould, isn't here, and I think we're not scheduled to begin for a few minutes, but we'll get started, and if George happens to get here, we'll add him into the panel. The purpose of this first session is to talk a little bit about the HEMAP program and the new federal version of the HEMAP program as an alternative, something that legal services programs can refer clients to as a way of helping people avoid foreclosure. HEMAP was created in the mid-1980s during shutdown of the steel mills, I guess, as a way of trying to keep people in their homes. And hold on. The things I think you can remember about HEMAP is that while it's a good tool for preventing foreclosure, it doesn't work for everyone. It's a tool that fits certain characteristics. You have to be in the situation you're in through no fault of your own, number one. So it's basically someone who would have been laid off from their job, a victim of domestic violence, having a medical emergency, some other sort of family problem that you didn't create yourself, and you have to have a reasonable prospect of being able to resume payments on your mortgage within 24 to 36 months, depending upon what the unemployment rate is in the state. So there's two critical pieces to it. If you're in the situation, if your client's in the situation they're in, through no fault of their own, and they have a reasonable prospect of being able to resume payments, then HEMAP is really a very good tool. The program in its history has helped over 44,000 families in Pennsylvania receive assistance. The approval rate is about 23%, which goes to not everybody is going to qualify for the program. Of the people who receive HEMAP assistance, less than 20% of them involuntarily lose their homes. So that for a foreclosure prevention tool, this is really an extremely successful tool. It's one where if you get the assistance and you meet the qualification for the program, there's a really great chance that the type of assistance you're going to be provided is going to be sufficient to help families preserve their homes in the long run. One of the issues with the program has always been there hasn't been enough money. And on an average year, the agency may receive anywhere from $5 to $11 million a year from the state government. I mean, some years maybe a little bit more, some years less, but that's probably an average, which is not really enough, certainly in times like these, to meet all the demands for mortgage foreclosure assistance. And again, if you get mortgage foreclosure assistance from HEMAP, there's two types of it. There's continuing assistance, which means the agency will, and here's George, the agency will make your mortgage payments for you for up to 24 to 36 months for the family. And there's non-continuing assistance, which is for someone who did have a problem paying their mortgage for whatever the reasons were, and has then gotten back to a situation where they're able to make the payments, but they have a past due amount. And the PHFA through the HEMAP program could help pay off the past due amount, bring the person up to current, and then they're, since they've gotten the job again or their medical problem's been resolved, they would be able to get back on their feet and continue on making their mortgage payments. So in light of the lack of, from my perspective anyway, lack of funding for the program, a number of people throughout the Commonwealth about a year and a half ago started looking for federal sources of money to supplement the state sources of funds. And at this point, I'll turn it over to George, who can talk a little bit about the effort in the last year and a half to try and get some federal funding to supplement the state funding.
Yeah, there was a broad-based effort, not only from Pennsylvania. Oh, you want me to get up here? Okay. Good morning. Just got the train, which was a little late. Anyway, there was a broad-based effort, as Mark has explained, to get some additional funding. And I'm not sure if Mark mentioned this, but you know, one of the big problems with the HAMP program, the federal program, it really didn't help people who were unemployed or underemployed, because quite simply they didn't have enough income to be involved in the HAMP program. And there was clearly a need to get something, a substantial amount of monies for people who were unemployed. And our state HEMAP program has not had enough money. So effort was created and advocates from around the country, but in large part advocates from Pennsylvania, simply because we had the HEMAP model, we were familiar with it. And we did a lot of discussions with Congressman Fattah, Senator Casey, to really push this. And it was an effort that took some time, but finally the provision appeared and got passed. It was in the Dodd-Frank bill, which got passed the end of the summer and signed by President Obama. I don't know how much you want me to get into the actual program itself.
No, I think I'm going to have John talk
Okay.
about the actual requirements. But I just wanted to have you give a little bit of the background of
Yeah.
why we were doing.
Yeah,
where
I
this
mean,
came
there was
from.
clearly a real pressing need to have this program because large numbers of unemployed people, underemployed people, and by the way, the program also, as John I'm sure will mention, helps people who have medical problems, which makes them unable to pay their mortgage payments. But there was this pressing need, and fortunately, Congress was responsive, and I would say the three people, Casey was very responsive, Barney Frank was incredibly responsive, and Congressman Fattah, who was very familiar with the HEMAP program, was also very responsive. So it helped having people familiar with HEMAP who were able to impress upon people in Washington the need to have some kind of a loan program. With that, why don't I let John do a little explanation of the program itself.
Yeah, I forgot to explain what we're going to try and do here. I was going to have George do a background of the program, John talk a little bit about the difference between the state HEMAP program and the new federal program, and what the differences are for eligibility and getting funding. Have Darrell talk about the way PHFA intends to administer the new funds in conjunction with or together with the state HEMAP funds, and then have Deb talk about the outreach efforts that the Consumer Credit Counseling Agency, the Delaware Valley, have initiated in southeastern Pennsylvania to try and increase participation and get people applying for HEMAP type programs. And then, go ahead. And then I was going to have George come back to talk about some of the issues also, but go ahead.
I mean, the one critical thing, and I'm sure John's going to mention it, is that there's $1 billion nationally, and Pennsylvania has over $100 million, but that money must be obligated by the end of September 2011, which creates a real pressing problem for the agency and for the program. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in Washington who would be very interested in getting that money back. So one of the problems now is that HUD has not yet made the program operational. They have come out with a summary, they came out with a notice, but they have not come out with the final guidelines as to how this program must operate. We're actually involved in a phone call tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock with several HUD officials on the issues as to when this program actually is going to get started. When we met with them the end of August, they said the program would be operational in December. December is here, and you know, the program is not yet operational, and I'm sure that it's making the agency nervous when they have this much money which they have to obligate very quickly. And some of the guidelines specifically say, for example, if money's not obligated by July, they could distribute monies to other places who have supposedly the ability to do it. So there's going to be a real need to talk about outreach and get this money out there and get it spent.
John?
Yeah, I'm going to stand up there because I got a computer screen blocking that side of the room. Hey, good morning. I'm John Gorel. I'm the Associate Counsel with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Been here a long time, 22 years. Prior to that, I worked in the Senate of Pennsylvania and had the fortune of meeting George 30 years ago and working on the HEMAP legislation. So it's amazing how these trains keep chasing each other around the track. As George mentioned, there's $105,804,000 that's to come to Pennsylvania for this new federal program, which we're going to call EHLP, or I'll just call it federal HEMAP because it makes more sense to us, I think, to call it that. The legislation was enacted effective October 1, but it really wasn't until, November. There was a publication put out by HUD, HUD guidance, they'll call it. It's not a regulation, but some guidance in terms of what they think the program should look like. I'll mention that some of the things they did with the legislation isn't what the statute says, but most recently, on November 12th, there was a notice published in the Federal Register asking states like Pennsylvania to apply to HUD to be approved to run the program. We have an application in the works. The deadline for getting that in is December 13th. So as Mark said and George said, I don't see us getting money this year for the program. I mean, the fact that we've run HEMAP all these years, we could have started making loans October 1 if we had the money to do that. So when we finally do get the funds, the first question I think we'll have is, can we apply those funds retroactively? We would like the answer to be yes from HUD. So, for example, if we're making loans, or we're taking applications now, especially applications, and we're approving those over December until we get the money, we'd like to be able to fund those applications for HEMAP with the federal dollars. We'd like to even perhaps go back and fund loans that we close with HEMAP money, like reimburse HEMAP, if they meet the qualifications of the federal program. We'll see if HUD goes that far. You know, we're hoping they will, but we shall see. I'm going to assume that most of you or all of you know what HEMAP is all about, so I'm not going to go back through, and I think Mark gave a good summary of what the HEMAP program is about. I'm going to try to point out the federal HEMAP and how it differs or how it is similar to the regular HEMAP program. First of all, property type. Under HEMAP, you can have a 1 or 2 unit property. Under the federal HEMAP, you can go up to 1 to 4 unit. So they extended a multifamily building, as long as it's owner occupied by the mortgagor, it can now be up to 1 to 4 units. A hardship. Under both HEMAP and the federal HEMAP, The applicant would have to show that they've suffered hardship. The federal legislation is more specific. It talks only about unemployment, underemployment, or medical problems, medical conditions. HEMAP, as you know, is broader. It can include a variety of things which resulted in financial instability for the homeowner that was not through their own fault. So, for example, if it's employment, they didn't quit their job, they were laid off. If their financial problems arose out of gambling, that would be through their own fault, okay? But the federal law is very specific: unemployment, underemployment, and medical. Income limit. Under HEMAP, there is no income limit. Actually, under the legislation as was passed by Congress for the federal program, there's no income limit. But for some reason, HUD decided to put in a 120% of area median income as an income limit for people under the federal program. Now, originally, the first guidance they put out said 120% at the time that the circumstances occurred. So in other words, not at the time of the application, but back when they became unemployed. That would have been a really stringent test to meet. So in other words, you're working, you're employed at 150%, you're unemployed, now you're down below 120, you would not have been eligible as they first wrote it, this guidance. Not regulations, just a guidance. The most recent statement, when they published the notice for the applications, they now have clarified that to say it's 120% at the time of application. So we were happy to see that. I think we'd be happier if they got rid of it, because in reality, trying to calculate income at different points in time with unemployment, underemployment, two people perhaps living in a home, one was working overtime and making the bills. It's having the income limit. We're not used to it with the HEMAP program, and we don't like it, actually. Mortgage delinquency. Under HEMAP, a person has to be at least 90 days delinquent, at least 60 days delinquent at the time the lender would send the Act 91 notice. The federal program says that the applicant has to be at least 3 months delinquent on their mortgage. In reality, it's probably about the same thing, because there is no notice, and I'll get to that part. There is no notice under the federal program like there is with the Act 91 notice. So well, we would anticipate, Darrell can talk more about this, but someone coming to us with a statement showing they're 3 months delinquent, they met that test. Okay? They don't need to come with an Act 91 notice, because many times they won't have one. Reasonable prospect. Under the HEMAP program, the person has to have a reasonable prospect of being able to pay their mortgage after the HEMAP assistance is over. That's pretty much the same case with the federal program, although the federal program threw a little zinger in that we would look at the income ratio. I'm assuming it's before the circumstance occurred, and their overall debt to income can't have been more than 55%. And that's, I'm not sure, again, why HUD came up with that. That wasn't in the federal statute. The number of mortgages assisted. Under HEMAP, we can assist on up to 2 mortgages. So let's say a first mortgage and a second mortgage. The federal program is limited to a first mortgage only. So I'm sure we'll get applicants who are delinquent in a first and a second mortgage. The question we'll have to answer then is, if we can only assist on the one, what about the second one? Do we ignore the fact there's delinquency there, that there's a potential for foreclosure on that second mortgage? We'll have to get to that bridge when we get there. The amount of assistance. HEMAP is limited, depending upon the amount of unemployment in Pennsylvania, to either 24 months of assistance or 36 months. Right now we're in a 36-month period because unemployment is so high. And no more than $60,000 can we put out in regard to that loan. One thing that the HEMAP statute is clear about, it's either 24 months or 36 months, including arrearages. Okay, so if someone comes to us with 6 months of arrearages and we bring them current, they now only have 30 more to go with the HEMAP assistance. The federal statute is not clear. It doesn't tell us if there is a limit. It says limited to 24 months, but it doesn't tell us that that includes arrearages or doesn't include arrearages. So I'm hoping for further guidance from HUD on that. Repayment. Under the HEMAP program, as you know, it's a very affordable repayment plan. If someone gets HEMAP assistance, they need to pay at least $25 per month for each mortgage assisted once our assistance is over. But it's based upon their ability to pay. So we do a calculation of their income versus housing expense, and they're not going to be required to pay more than 40% of their net monthly income, including that, for all their core housing expense, including the HEMAP payment. The federal program is totally different. They've come up with a scheme of basically it's, as long as the people stay in the property after the assistance is rendered, there won't be any repayment. The amount of the debt will decrease by 20% per year for over a 5-year period. So as long as they stay in the home for 5 years following the assistance being granted, the debt basically goes away. So it's in a lot of regards, it's a better deal than the HEMAP funds. As George mentioned, our funds have to be obligated by September 30, 2011. Now, that would be basically an application would have to be approved by that point. So come July and August, we'll be hounding our counseling agencies to make sure they're getting the applications that they have on their desk into us so we can make a decision before that date. The payment can extend beyond that date. In fact, you know, they can get the 24 months of assistance, so it may extend it for 2 years beyond that date, or actual payouts. But the application would have to be approved by the end of September. It's a short window, and the sooner we get the funds, the better. The challenges of the federal program will be, number one, there is no Act 91 notice. And as you know, FHA loans have been excluded from HEMAP since the program started. So they don't get an Act 91 notice. Now, FHA loans are eligible under the federal program. The question is going to be, how are they going to find out about it? So we're going to be relying upon outreach efforts of our counseling agencies, the advocates that are out there, probably some public service announcements, getting in touch with the sheriff's offices. We have a letter drafted that's going to go out to the unemployment offices from the Secretary of Labor and Industry, and when people apply for unemployment benefits, they'll be informed of this program at that point. All of the programs that exist with mediation around Pennsylvania, we'll be getting in touch with them so that they know about the existence of the program. But it's going to be a challenge, you know, getting the word out about the new program. And the other thing would be the clarifications I mentioned. You know, does it include? The other clarification is, do the arrearages include attorney fees? Under HEMAP, we do pay reasonable attorney fees, and we've defined what that means. But in the federal statutes, it's not clear. It's not one of the listed things under the arrearages that are payable. We're assuming they'd have to be paid, or else you're not going to be bringing that mortgage current. We're hoping that HUD agrees with that. And then the 24 months, is it 24 months including arrearages, or is it arrearages plus 24 months? So again, we have challenges. We have a PowerPoint presentation, which is longer than this even. We did a telephone webinar on Tuesday, and I had to produce a PowerPoint presentation for that, although I'm not sure why. Anyway, it exists, and it goes through HEMAP. It also talks about the HERO program and that we run, and a REAL program, which is a refinance program. It's all in there, and it's on our website. So if you go to the PHFA website, on the very first page under new agency news, you can access the PowerPoint, which includes a description of this program as well.
Which wants to say one?
Yeah, just a couple things. I just had a quick follow-up comment. John mentioned we had done a webinar, it was on Tuesday, about the program. One of the issues is unlike HEMAP, if you apply for HEMAP, there's a delay in the foreclosure. This program does not have the delay. Now, there's a big advantage to be living in Pennsylvania because we can have everybody apply for HEMAP, so effectively they will get a delay. However, if it's FHA, they won't have a delay. When we met with HUD in August, we actually drafted a legal memo for HUD saying they had authority to, in fact, impose a delay on lenders once an application is received. They have not done that yet. They haven't mentioned that yet. Their response has been that this program is going to be so quick, or so efficient, and so objective, it's not going to take a lot of time. Therefore, there's not going to be a reason for a delay. We haven't yet seen that, but as I said, we're talking with them tomorrow, and one of the issues, we have about 20 issues we're raising. One of them is about imposing a delay, and hopefully that will happen. I know the agency, under HEMAP, if you don't apply within the time period, the agency sometimes will request the lender to delay the foreclosure, and hopefully, that will continue happening then. There's a whole bunch of issues. John mentioned them. You know, are arrearages included in the 24-month? That's very important. Attorney's fees are very important because this is going to apply to existing cases where you have attorney's fees. And if the loan is not able to cover attorney's fees, it's going to be very problematic to resolve that case. That is not an issue that HUD has yet resolved. There is also an issue about medical conditions, because what HUD has written so far, it says the medical conditions has to have caused a reduction in income. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Obviously, a reduction in income would mean if you have a lot of bills and you have to pay those medical bills because they're uninsured, then your income is reduced. Hopefully, that's what it means. Bunch of other questions. If the agency gets the money paid back, are they going to be able to respend it, or are they going to have to send that money back to Washington? I'm not sure how much money they're going to get back, but that's obviously an issue for the agency. Anyway, why don't we move to Darrell? But there are still a lot of outstanding issues, and hopefully HUD is going to resolve them and resolve them correctly, so this program is actually going to work and the money is going to get spent. One thing I really want to emphasize is the need in your communities to get out, if you're counseling agencies, if you're attorneys, whoever, once this program is operational, to get people to apply, because as John mentioned, there's not going to be a notice like there is now under HEMAP. So this really has to be an outreach effort by everybody.
Good morning. My name is Darrell Rotz, for those who don't know me, and I have been the director of the HEMAP program since 1999. I am also one of the original HEMAPers, and by that I mean I've been with the program since it started back in 1983, and I've been with the agency for over 28 years. What I'd like to do for you here today, and again I'm going to be probably talking more towards the counseling agencies, or it'll be directed more towards how this EHLP program is going to operate and flow. First and foremost, we strongly recommend that the application be made through a PHFA-approved counseling agency. And there are some benefits from doing that. The applicant will receive beneficial counseling regarding credit, budget, and foreclosure mitigation. They will also receive guidance and direction to supportive service and local assistance agencies. In addition, a complete well-documented application will save PHFA staff time. HEMAP has over 27 years of history regarding the request of information from homeowners. Our internal HEMAP recertification process tells us that getting complete information from homeowners directly through the mail does not work real well. That's why we feel that it's absolutely necessary that we utilize our counseling agencies. We certainly do realize that there may be some emergency situations where, we may take an application directly from that homeowner. For instance, if somebody calls us and they've got a sheriff's sale next week, of course, they're not going to be able to get into a counseling agency and get it processed. So therefore, we may do a direct application with the homeowner. But again, it's going to be in an emergency type situation. Hopefully, we'll be able to filter most of the applicants through a counseling agency. This is basically the way we're envisioning the process will work. The homeowner will call regarding the EHLP program, whether they call a PHFA or a counseling agency. The first question that we would ask that you ask is, do you have an Act 91 notice? Certainly, if the answer to that question is yes, then you should do a HEMAP application. A timely HEMAP application gives the homeowner a stay on foreclosure, whereas an EHLP application does not. And all HEMAP applications will be reviewed to see if they can be funded through the EHLP program.
Can I ask you a
Sure,
question?
sure.
Do you envision any situation in which someone gets an Act 91 notice that they shouldn't apply for HEMAP? No. If they get the Act 91 notice, they should apply for HEMAP because it gives them a stay on foreclosure.
If I could add one thing, there are cases though where people get an Act 91 notice and it's an FHA mortgage. I think that in that case, We go either way. But if they're timely, they'll get the benefit of the
Right.
stay, even if it is an FHA
Right.
mortgage, because the notice tells them that.
Correct. Yep. If they have not yet received an Act 91 notice, the next two-part question should be asked. Are you at least 3 payments behind on your mortgage? And are you the owner and occupant of the property that is in foreclosure? If the answer to that question is yes, then the counseling agency should send out a confirmation of face-to-face meeting and schedule them for an EHLP application intake. Again, there are no statutory deadlines in the filing of an EHLP application. However, I would encourage the counseling agencies to complete the application and get it to PHFA as quickly as possible. You know, you don't have to, again, there's no statutory requirements, but you know, we're going to be hard pressed to get this money spent within the time period that has been mentioned. And the faster you can get that application into us, the faster we'll be able to look at it and make a decision on it.
Darrell, I assume if someone is 2.5 months behind and they call, you could schedule the appointment
Oh, of course.
for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there'll be
You have
3
to
months
use
of
your
time to come
judgment,
in.
certainly. Certainly. But what may happen is, and I'm sure it has probably happened in some of the federal programs, when people hear about this, they think, this is free money. And they may not be delinquent on their mortgage yet. So you need to make sure that they are. And certainly, you know, I think HUD is going to be, certainly the guidelines are pretty strict on that. It does state you have to be 3 payments behind and you have to be the owner and occupant of the property. If the answer is no, the homeowner would not yet be able to apply. However, as I said earlier, preliminary EHLP guidelines are very clear in that the homeowner must be at least 3 payments delinquent on their first mortgage and must be the owner occupant of the property. The counseling agency could, however, bring the homeowner in for foreclosure mitigation counseling at that point in time. The EHLP application, it will be a more streamlined application than the HEMAP process. We are only going to be requiring 5 standard forms along with homeowner supplied information. These 5 forms will be as follows. Of course, you need a letter of confirmation that would be sent out to the homeowner telling them what they're going to need to bring into the face-to-face meeting. And secondly, we have the application itself. It's a 2-page, 8.5 by 11 application, very similar to the HEMAP application. And then we also feel that the circumstances are very critical, and therefore we are going to be using our circumstance analysis form, again, that is very similar to what we use with the HEMAP program. And then there's a release of information form, and then the form regarding the confidentiality of information. The application and the circumstance analysis form are the only forms requiring detailed completion by the counseling agency. Counseling agencies will not be required to send any notifications. HEMAP will notify the lender of the receipt of an EHLP application, and the homeowner and lender will be notified of our decision. Also, I'd like to point out there is no appeal process for the EHLP program. I'd also like to, for the counseling agencies that are here today, if you want to see me before the end of the day, I do have some copies of the application, the circumstance analysis form, and the other forms that I mentioned that I will can certainly give to you so that you can at least see what it looks like. The homeowner can be approved for either a continuing or a non-continuing loan, very similar to HEMAP. And again, if it's a continuing loan, their contribution, the calculation for that is going to be a little bit different than HEMAP, but again, it follows the same general type principles. If approved, we will be requesting a detailed reinstatement figure from the lender. Our required closing documents will also be abbreviated. We're anticipating, and again, this is based on John's comments, that all we're going to need is a mortgage, a note, and a summary of the program information page. So it's basically just going to be those 3 documents. The counseling agencies and internal staff will close the loans. We are also considering a direct mail closing in order to speed up the process. And by what I mean by that is where we would simply send out the closing documents to the homeowner with a a letter of instructions telling them what to do, essentially sign here, take the mortgage to a notary, get it notarized, and send it back. We've done some of that even for HEMAP, and it's worked well, but we think that with the number of approvals that we're probably going to have under this program, the coordination of trying to get them into it takes time. If we process them and then send them out to the counseling agency, and then till they get them in, and then get them scheduled, and then they don't show up, and then they try to come back and get scheduled again, it just takes a lot of time. Whereas we think it could be a lot more effective by just sending them the documents and say, sign here, send it back. We just think it might improve, speed up the process, because speed is going to be very important here, I think. Sure. We will soon be emailing the EHLP application to our counseling agencies. It is formatted in Excel, very similar to the HEMAP Excel application. Sure. Yeah, we can certainly send it to anybody that wants it. I can get it to George and Mark, and they can forward it out to anybody else that might want it in the legal service industry. Counseling agency billing will be the same as if you were filing a HEMAP application. You'll be able to bill up to $125 per application. Again, this is just a real quick rundown of how we envision this operating. And certainly it's not written in gold, and we are certainly open to any ideas or suggestions that anyone may have to improve the process. Again, I think John indicated earlier that our goal is to try to fund as many HEMAP closings as possible through the EHLP funds. And again, we are hoping to be able to back fund closings from October 1st, 2010 until we get this money from HUD. This will hopefully help to alleviate some of the financial pressures in the HEMAP program. Under the EHLP program, funds must be encumbered by September 30th, 2011. Therefore, getting adequate funding for HEMAP in the 11-12 fiscal year is going to be critical. We have asked for $15 million, and we're certainly not holding our breath as to whether we will get that. The last couple of years, it's been getting tighter and tighter, and certainly with the budget issues that the state is facing, we're not optimistic that we're going to get $15 million, but that's what we're projecting we're going to need in order to be able to keep HEMAP flowing the way we want it to. And again, this is for the 11-12 fiscal year. But what we hope doesn't happen is that with all this hoopla over the EHLP program, that everybody forgets that that we still need funding for HEMAP, and it's going to be critical, because we could get $105 million for EHLP and have to have it encumbered by September 30th, but then if we don't get adequate funding for HEMAP by the beginning of 2012, we could have some real major issues again. So again, that's my presentation on how we envision the HLP program flowing. If there's any questions or concerns, I'd be willing to answer them. Yeah. The one was the letter of confirmation that is sent to the homeowner telling them what to bring into the counseling agency for their meeting or for the filling out of the EHLP application. And then the other one is just the application itself. And then the circumstance analysis form. And the confidentiality of information form. It's just a standard form that you give out to the homeowner. Nothing needs to be filled out on it. And then the other one was the release of information form, which states that we may use the information in order to get a credit report, a property search, or whatever. Yes?
Can a homeowner get assistance under both HEMAP and the federal program, or is it for us?
Can I just interrupt for a moment?
Sure.
Because we're videotaping, people either need to come to the mic to ask their question, or if they ask from the audience, then somebody up here needs to repeat the question. Okay? But people are certainly encouraged to come.
Okay.
Can a homeowner receive assistance under both HEMAP and the federal program, or is it a one or the other type of assistance?
John and I have certainly had that discussion, and we think they can receive assistance under both programs.
In certain circumstances, for example, if, let's say they have a pretty resolute second mortgagee who's threatening to foreclose and is serious about, I mean, maybe send an Act 91 notices moving forward, we maybe can use the HEMAP funds to assist on the second mortgage and the EHLP money to assist on the first mortgage. The other thing I can see happening is maybe someone has used up the 24 months of EHLP money and they may then be reapplying for HEMAP assistance to get them through an additional year.
Right. Or vice versa.
Yeah. I mean, our goal is to use the EHLP money whenever possible.
Right.
Run.
Are the counseling agencies expected to pre-qualify people for the EHLP program? I noticed that there's unemployment, underemployment, but I don't see things like divorce on there. So do we tell them if they have a divorce situation, you're not eligible for this program, or do we send it in anyway as if it were an Act 91?
That's a good question. The question was whether the counseling agencies would be pre-qualifying homeowners. I mean, our initial thoughts on that matter were, I mean, certainly we want to get them into the counseling agencies because they're going to receive beneficial counseling. But if they're not suffering financial hardship due to unemployment, underemployment, or medical, they're not going to meet the requirements of the EHLP program.
They could meet the requirements of HEMAP.
But yeah, but if they have an Act 91 notice, certainly they could meet the requirements of HEMAP, of course. But if they, assuming it's let's just say it's an FHA Title II loan, there's no Act 91 involved, and they come into you and they say they're delinquent because their husband left them, they're not going to be eligible under the HLP program, the way I understand it. And filing that application gives them false hopes and creates more work for us.
Unless it created severe psychological problems and they now have a medical condition.
That's
Right. Right.
That's right.
So use your imagination, too.
Yeah, the medical, I think, issue, and I think a lot of people do have uninsured medical problems or medical issues, and I think that is a way to get people eligible for EHLP.
Possibly. And there is one issue with the medical situation is they do have to, based on what I've read, there does have to be at least a 15% reduction in income from, prior to that circumstance. If they have a medical situation, and let's say that occurred in 2008, and then or it occurred in 2009, there has to be some sort of reduction in income. Because I know John and I had discussed that, that you could have a medical situation, but there's no loss of income.
Well, but I think the argument is, and we're going to argue this tomorrow
Right.
with HUD, is that if you have bills and you have to pay those bills, that effectively is loss of income. Otherwise, adding that makes no sense, because if the medical problems just cause you to lose your job, then you wouldn't need the medical problems in the statute. And that was an amendment to an old law. Congress specifically put in medical problems, so it must mean something, and therefore I think you can make it, hopefully HUD will agree, that if you have bills, that's a loss of income.
Okay.
Let me just follow up on that question. I think that there's a lot of research that's out there on effects of mortgage foreclosure process on families, and some of the studies show that close to 25 to 30% of the families who are in the foreclosure process end up having significant medical problems in their families. And whether it's caused by the foreclosure process or the medical problems caused the foreclosure, I'm not sure the research shows exactly, but there's a significant portion of people who the foreclosure process causes medical problems. So if you see people who come in, whether they state they have a medical problem, it's worth talking to them a little bit, because the general research, and I think the study was done in Philadelphia at Thomas Jefferson University, and there's a significant correlation between the two. Whether it's one caused the other, I'm not sure everybody knows, but it's there.
You addressed the application should be completed by a HEMAP certified counseling agency. But how does the populace know about this program? How does the homeowner, what is sent to him about the program itself?
Well, we're certainly going to be doing some mass media, and we're certainly going to be advertising a lot of information on our website. I think there's going to be some television commercials, radio ads. As far as FHA folks, we're hoping that the servicers will be getting that message out to the FHA population.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. One of the things we're doing in Philadelphia is, and we have a mortgage foreclosure steering committee, I think I see Aram here, is really to urge council to urge the servicers to get this information out there. And to make, one of the things we've encouraged that is that a lot of these folks are going to be probably in some kind of a HAMP situation with their servicer, which they probably are not going to be eligible. Certainly those servicers could refer those cases and make sure those people actually apply. So it's really going to take a very concentrated outreach effort by everybody, and monies can be used of the $100 million, and we certainly think it's a good idea to do substantial outreach.
Will people have to file two applications, one for HEMAP and one for this program, or will one application be good for both?
One, I mean, again, if they have the Act 91 notice, they should do the HEMAP application. If they don't have the Act 91, then they just fill out the EHLP application.
It seems that often the people who are either unemployed or underemployed need a modification in order to have a long-term sustainable loan. So I'm not quite sure how the EHLP program will work in those regards when the individual still needs that permanent modification in order to make it feasible in the long run. Like, how will bringing them current, if they're behind 3 or 4 months, help them? And will they, I mean, I assume EHLP is not contingent on any sort of modification, but will they be able to work together in that way?
I would think that they would be able to. I mean, certainly with the EHLP program, we can provide continuing assistance, hopefully for up to 24 months. But if it's a situation where they clearly can't afford this home or this mortgage any longer, then you know, it gets on that reasonable prospect issue. And I don't know, George, do you have anything?
One of the things when we talk to HUD is having coordination with Treasury in the HAMP program, that once someone gets approved for EHLP, that they also could get involved with the loan modification at the same time. I don't think that's necessarily inconsistent. Hopefully that's one of the things that HUD is working on, because you're right, some of these loans need to be modified. But that's something that HUD and Treasury has not yet decided.
Yeah.
The criteria for HEMAP, as far as cause of delinquency, is quite broad. The federal program is narrow, and medical condition is pretty straightforward, but adverse economic conditions is really incredibly vague. Do you have any idea about how that's going to be interpreted?
I think we're going to focus mostly on the unemployment, underemployment, and medical. I mean, I know that language is in there about adverse economic conditions, but you tell me what it means.
So unemployed through no fault of their own, underemployed, they're working fewer hours?
Right.
Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
Don, when we spoke to HUD, I don't think that's going to be an issue. That basically, you know, you're going to need the 15% reduction in income. If you meet that and you're unemployed or underemployed, then you're eligible. I don't think the adverse economic conditions is going to be an issue.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, Darryl and I have talked, and our goal hopefully is to have a very high approval rate. I mean, we're hoping it's double or triple the HEMAP approval rate. And that's another reason why Darryl said we really would like to get applications that are approvable. So if the counseling agency can, in a sense, screen out people who are clearly not eligible, that's okay, because we'll be turning them down, and our approval rate will be lower. You know, I think some people go through HEMAP sometimes to buy time, and even though they know they're not eligible, they're getting a stay. So you don't have that issue with this program.
Ron?
Yes, I have a question. If you say you hope that the approval rate's going to be greater, then there must mean that the criteria it's going to be relaxed somehow. I'm just thinking. And if so, then the HEMAP applicants that got denied at one point, and especially more recently, because the criteria was stricter, could they then apply for the federal program?
Sure. There's nothing limiting them on reapplying.
They can.
Yes.
I had, one of the issues that I think everybody has discussed is the fact that the period of time in which this funding has to be spent is short, and it's getting shorter, excuse me, every day until HUD comes out with the guidelines for how the program's actually supposed to be operated. I had given out a map, I think people have on their tables, of the response rate for Act 91 notices. So these are people who actually get Act 91 notices, and what the percentage of those who actually apply for HEMAP. And the expectation or the hope is that we can substantially increase the number of people who get Act 91 notices, and for those who don't even get Act 91 notices, to get them in the door to apply. And that's why Deb is here to talk a little bit about some of the efforts from the Consumer Credit Counseling Agency to Delaware Valley and how they've done outreach to try and get more people in the door to apply for foreclosure assistance. So, Deb, do you want to?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thanks for inviting me here. Can you all hear me? Several years ago, we realized that in order to get clients into our organization, we really needed to be out there in the trenches with the community groups and nonprofits and the politicians and the business people, so that we could help them to understand that there's an awful lot of people out there that are hurting today. So we developed a community outreach team that now goes out and spends time, excuse me, meeting with the politicians' offices, meeting with community groups. We join housing partnerships, anything that we could do to reach out to individuals and help drive them into our organization. But we also know that that's not everything that's going to, that's not the way that we're going to get everybody in. So back in 2007, pardon me, I have to put my glasses on. Back in 2007, we started working with a worldwide mortgage insurance company and partnered with them to provide nationwide counseling for homeowners whose mortgages they insured and were delinquent. So today what we do is we contact those homeowners whose mortgages are more than 60 days delinquent. We send letters to the individuals informing them of opportunities to come to receive, well, they can either come to receive housing counseling, or in this case we do provide housing counseling over the telephone. The letter also explains that there are modification programs out there for individuals, and there's other payment plans that they may be eligible for. So it stresses the fact that there is some hope for them, and all they need to do is make a telephone call. And then it provides them also with an 800 number to call in to our agency. But in the meantime, we also take a database list from the mortgage insurance company, and then we provide outreach calls, at least up to 3 outreach calls for individuals whose mortgages are in distress. Excuse me. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that and what some of the numbers look like with regard to results. Since the inception of the program, we have been referred over 23,000 mortgage holders whose mortgage are delinquent. We've made over 75,000 telephone calls and counseled more than 1,800 people that are borrowers from the mortgage insurance company. But the good news for them is that we've also helped to save them over $8 million in losses they would have sustained should they not have been able to reach these people. We also just started a special project with this company again in October, where we are going another step further and submitting loan modification packages to the servicers of these insured individuals. We're using Hope Loan Port, that some of you are familiar with, which is a web-based portal for submission of the modification packages and requests and documentation from the counselors, and it's being sent on behalf of the borrowers, as I said, to the servicers exclusively under this program. Well, while we've had a little bit of problem with the servicers picking up the information from the porthole, we feel that, you know, this is probably the way to go, especially for the counseling agencies who experience so much of a workload that's caused by the servicer saying, I didn't receive this paper, I didn't get this fax, I didn't get the information that I need. So now, using the porthole, we can be assured that the information that we put into the porthole is going to be received by the servicers once they pick it up. So since that time, since we started in the early October, we've actually loaded 500 borrow applications into the porthole for the servicers to take a look at. So that's a way that we might be able to work together, since we all know that there's plenty of work out there for all of the counseling agencies, that if we can help get the servicers on board using this portal, that maybe we can actually help more clients under the new federal HEMAP program. And that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you this morning. Thanks.
Can you address a little bit the success of the phone calls? Because, I mean, the agency does has, at least for the Act 91 notices, has the information for the people who've gotten Act 91 notices. What has been the results of the actual direct phone calls to the families?
Yeah. Well, the actual direct results are that we've actually counseled 1,800 people who have gotten some help through this program out of the 23,000, 1,800. So that's, you know, what, a little bit less than 10%, or 10%. But our feeling is that if we had more agencies involved and can assist and more time to make those telephone calls out to the individuals during times when people are home, number one, we think that we could be more successful in getting more people in the doors. And the other thing is that we have lenders out there that say we're contacting individuals who are delinquent on their mortgages and they're just not picking up the phone. And we realize that probably is the case. But if somebody sees that the call is coming in from an agency and not from their mortgage company, we see that it's more likely for them to be able to pick up the phone and answer it, and then we can start to work with them. You're welcome.
Darrell, what do you think, or John, what do you think the options or the opportunities are for the agency to, you know, maybe work with some counseling agencies to do direct calls to people who've gotten Act 91 notices as a way of trying to get more people in the door for applications?
Well, I know that we have been supplying information to CCCS of Delaware Valley, not specific information, but we've been supplying the Act 91 notices that we gather, or that lenders are required to notify us. We collect, we basically just have an address. We don't have any names associated with it, but we've been supplying to CCCS of Delaware Valley at least data as to where it's coming from in like a 5-county area. And I imagine that you have probably been sending out flyers and materials such as that to those areas, trying to reach those people. And I would think, I mean, my guess is, again, I don't know why, you know, we're not really sure why only about 10% of the people apply for HEMAP. You know, if you look at the total Act 91 notices that are sent and the total applications, about 10%. And you know, without doing some kind of direct research on why people don't apply, you know, we don't understand, you know, why they're not applying. And maybe a lot of folks are just in, you know, they're 3 payments behind and they can work it out on their own. But
Darrell, I think from anecdotal, you know, I think there are some reasons, and from my talking to counseling agencies. I mean, one is, you know, the Act 91 notice, quite frankly, is a confusing notice. When it was combined with Act 6, which the legislature mandated, you know, it got wordy, it got long, even though I think the agency, and we worked with John when that notice got revised, it, you know, did the best it could do. I still think it's lengthy and has a whole lot of information. And quite frankly, the amount of mail people get, you know, this is another notice from the lender. Since it comes from the lender, people tend not to respond. And quite frankly, I think another reason is that...
Well, hold, George, hold on 1 second. I mean, George raises an interesting point that a number of years ago, George and John Dodds and a few other people worked to try to make the Act 91 notice a little bit more understandable. And I just wonder whether this is a good opportunity, given the amount of money we have, whether it's an opportunity to go back, look at it, and see, again, is there an opportunity to make the Act 91 notice more understandable to try and increase the number of people who are applying? And John just fell under the table. But
No, I mean, I think maybe, we could probably get that job done by the end of September.
Or maybe
But I don't think in time for this program.
Or maybe put an additional flyer, additional piece of paper in there mentioning this program, maybe, 5 or 6 sentences in very bold saying there's a new substantial amount of money coming into Pennsylvania which you may be eligible to receive, which would hopefully get people to apply, rather than trying to rewrite it, which I think would be complicated, but add an additional piece of paper, which I think could probably be done relatively easy, and have lenders send that out.
I would like to just interject there, though. I think that we find in a lot of cases in our agency that the clients aren't opening
That's true.
any of their mail because of what's going on. So I think trying to take a different approach where, talking about the list of addresses, maybe buying a program whereby we can match those addresses to names and telephone numbers, and doing outreach telephone calls may actually be more helpful than sending another letter that doesn't get opened.
Yeah, no,
That's a very good point.
But I think putting a little piece of paper in there would, I agree with you, people don't open it, but I don't think that would hurt to do that. The other, quite frankly, and I hear this from counseling agencies, is that the agency's approval rate, and you mentioned the need to really increase that substantially, but I think some counseling agencies say, well, only 20% of people are getting approved for HEMAP. They're not real strong advocates for getting people, quite frankly, to apply, because the chances of getting approved, aren't all that good, which to me doesn't make any sense, because at a minimum you get a delay. But I think that mindset really has to change, and people really need to, counselors especially, need to strongly encourage everyone to apply for HEMAP.
Questions?
I wondered if you could return to the issue of repayment under the federal program. I just want to make sure I got it straight.
Okay.
That it seems that the homeowner may not need to repay the federal assistance, but there is a requirement that PHFA come up with a repayment process. I'm confused.
Well, basically, as long as they stay in their home for a period of 5 years, then each year is going away at the rate of 20%. So at the end of the 5-year period, there's no more debt. I hate to call that forgiveness, because there's other issues about debt forgiveness I think we like to avoid. So it's not forgiveness, it's disappearing debt, okay? Now, if they refinance.
Can you define that?
Right. If they move out early, then there would be an amount that would have to get repaid.
But unlike with HEMAP, during that 5-year period after they receive the assistance, there won't be a process of analyzing their income and expenses and coming up with a payment amount. They stay in the house for 5 years, the debt.
I don't know how
Correct.
that would relate to the-
So there's no payment during the 5-year period, there's no interest running during the 5-year period. As long as they stay there for a whole 5-year period, it goes away.
Hi.
Hi.
I just had one quick comment, since you were discussing why homeowners are not applying for the HEMAP assistance. In our office,
Which is where?
In Downingtown, Chester County. What we're finding is many of the homeowners that come in with their Act 91 notices or call us, the Act 91 notices are generally expired because they were in a loan modification or placed into a forbearance plan, and were told by the lender, ignore the Act 91 notice. You don't have to respond to that. It's a part of the process, so you don't have to do anything with it. And then they find out later that it was a very important document for them, and it does need to be put into better layman's terms, because the Act 91 notice, that's a lot of, I can't call it mumbo jumbo, but it's a lot of words on there. It's bombastic, and many of the homeowners don't, all they see is Act 91 notice. They are not going to read the rest of it because it's foreign to them. So just, I just wanted to make that
Is that a
comment.
common experience where people tell homeowners don't apply for HEMAP?
I'd just like to add on to that. Every one of my experience has been that the first thing they do is they call the lender, and then the lender is going to tell them, or the servicer really, is going to tell them, about modifications. And, I think that's what does happen. That's the gut reaction. They just call the lender.
Does the agency see that a lot with people coming in with expired notices?
Well, when you say expired, I mean, they can
past it.
apply at any time prior to foreclosure sale. So it's, in the beginning of the program, if you didn't apply within 30 days, you were out of luck. But that's not the case. It hasn't been the case for a number of years. So it never really expires. I mean,
You just don't get to stay.
Right. You don't get to stay, and if you wait too long, you'll be more than 36 months delinquent, perhaps, and then you're not eligible to be approved at that point.
I think one more question. I think Sam's telling me to wrap it up.
Would folks who are in bankruptcy, either Chapter 7 or Chapter 13, be eligible for these programs?
Yes. Yeah, we see people now. I mean, actually, the mumbo jumbo in the letter says this, but it says that if you're in bankruptcy, you can still apply for HEMAP assistance, and if you're approved, then we just get bankruptcy court approval of the new loan that you're getting from HEMAP, and the same would be in the federal program.
I guess my thought is if you have, I have some Chapter 13 folks who obviously have delinquencies they're trying to pay back. Would the federal program possibly be able to pay back the back payments and that type of thing?
Yes. I mean, yes, HEMAP does that now. I mean, they sometimes file bankruptcy for different reasons. They're talked into it by a bankruptcy attorney, might be one reason. They are getting close to a sheriff's sale and getting nervous, so they file bankruptcy. But if they're approved for HEMAP assistance or for this assistance, they can then choose. Do they want to stay with the bankruptcy Chapter 13 plan of curing their problem, or do they want us to do it with a HEMAP loan or an EHLP loan? With the EHLP money, it's a better deal than bankruptcy because you're not going to have a plan payment, at least for the mortgage debt. You may still be in it for taxes or for car payments or some other reason.
I know we got to stop. I just want to make clear one thing that was just said, that while you may have, quote, an expired HEMAP notice, an Act 91 notice, people can still apply even after the time period and qualify for HEMAP, which in many cases will be able to stop a foreclosure. I just want to thank the people in the panel and for doing a good job, and hopefully people can get something out of this and get their clients to apply for HEMAP. So thank you.